So, good evening everyone. My topic is about Sarbanes-Oxley Act and fraud. So, the act establishes as a framework to modernize and reform the oversight and regulation of the public company auditing. So, 'di ba, alam naman na natin tong Sarbanes-Oxley Act and fraud kasi na-topic na natin to last time. Alam ko na-topic na natin to. So, ayun, slight background lang. Sarbanes-Oxley is named from its sponsors na si Senator Paul Sarbanes and si Congressman Sir Michael Oxley. So, it is also called Sarbox or SOX. And it became a law on July 30, 2002, enforced by SEC. So, it has a goal na ma-improve yung corporate governance and accountability ng every corporation. So, lahat ng public companies kailangan mag-comply sa SOX, both financial and IT departments. So, ayun, sinagawa yung Sarbanes-Oxley Act kasi nung time na yon laganap yung mga case about fraud of financial statements. So, remember yung pinanood nating video about Enron? Isa yun sa mga case ng fraud na nangyari. Diba, tinago nila yung mga assets tsaka big amounts ng liabilities sa mga investors and creditors. So, with Sarbanes-Oxley Act, it protects shareholders and the general public from accounting errors and fraudulent practices na ginagawa ng company. And to improve the accuracy of corporate disclosures and to make more reliable and accurate financial statements. So, its principal reforms pertain to, first, the creation of Accounting Oversight Board. So, Sarbanes-Oxley created the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board to set accounting quality control and ethics standards to inspect registered accounting firms, to conduct investigations, and to take disciplinary actions. So, isa tong non-profit organization that regulates audits of publicly traded companies para ma-minimize yung audit risk. So, meron silang 4 primary duties. First is to register public accounting firms that prepare audit reports for issuers, audit brokers, and dealers. So, second, establish or adopt auditing and related attestation, quality control, ethics, and independent standards. Third is to inspect registered firms, audits, and quality control systems. Fourth is to investigate and discipline registered public accounting firms and their associated persons for violations of specified laws, rules, or professional standards. So, para ma-attain nila yung 4 primary duties sa Public Company Accounting Oversight Board is nagkakonduct sila ng mga economic research and risk analysis, engage sa mga stakeholders and other domestic and internal regulators, and binamanage nila yung workforce, technology, and resources na kakailangan nila sa pag-perform ng mga duties. Next na principal reforms ng Sarbanes-Oxley Act is the auditor independence. The Act addresses auditor independence by creating more separation between a firm's attestation and non-auditing activities. So, independence of the auditor means independence from parties whose interests could be harmed sa result ng audit. Audit independence is important so that auditors' opinions are unbiased. So, ayan. So, next is corporate governance and responsibility. The Act requires all audit committee members to be independent and requires the audit committee to hire and oversee external auditor. So dito, it is a system of rules, policies, and practices na nagdidictate how a company's board of directors manages and oversees the operations ng company, includes principles of transparency, accountability, and security. So, having a poor corporate governance sa isang company leads to a failure na ma-achieve yung goal ng company. And worse, it it can lead to the collapse of company and significant financial losses for shareholders. So these are the two provisions ng Sarbanes-Oxley Act na significant sa corporate governance. So first, public companies are prohibited from making loans to executive officers and directors. Second, the Act requires attorneys to report evidence of material violation of securities laws of breaches of fiduciary duty to the CEO, CFO, or the PCAOB. Fourth is issuer and management disclosure. SOX imposes new corporate disclosure requirements including public companies must report all of balance sheet transactions, annual report. So, ayan. So, kung sa dito sa issuer and management disclosure, Sarbanes-Oxley Act deals with earlier and more complete disclosure of information on anything that directly and indirectly influences or might influence yung mga financial result. So, nare-require ng SEC na yung disclosure of relevant business and financial information sa mga potential investors kapag nag-issue na yung publics ng new securities such as stocks and bonds and exemptions are made for small issues and private placements. Fifth is fraud and criminal penalties. The Act creates new federal crimes relating to the destruction of documents or audit work papers, securities fraud, tampering with documents to be used in an official proceeding and actions against whistleblowers. Dito sa Sarbanes-Oxley Act, naglabas sila ng mga new criminal penalties para sa mga fraudulent handling of documents, interference with investigations, and violation of disclosure rules. So, next is the corruption. So, it is the use of powers by government officials or their network contacts for illegitimate private gain. So, corruption has 4 forms: bribery, illegal gratuities, conflicts of interest, and economic extortion. First is bribery. It involves giving, offering, soliciting something of value to influence an official in the performance of his or her lawful duties. It defrauds the entity of the right of loyal and honest services from those employed. So, bribery, it involves someone in an appointed position acting voluntarily in breach of trust for exchange of a benefit. So, yung benefit doesn't have to be necessarily cash. It can be a gift, access to assets, or favor, ganun, etc. So, there are 2 kinds of bribery which are active and passive. Active bribery is when a person offers, promises, or gives a bribe. Passive bribery naman when a person requests, receives, or accepts a bribe. Next is illegal gratuities. It involves giving, offering, soliciting something of value because of an official act has been taken. This is similar to bribery, but the transaction occurs after the act. So the person decides to give the public, for example the person decides to give public official something of value purely because of the official act na ginawa nila. Next is economic extortion. It is the use of force by an individual or organization to obtain something of value. The item of value could be a financial or economic asset, information, or cooperation to obtain a favorable decision on some matter under review. So, economic extortion occurs when an employee demands payment from a vendor for decisions made in the vendor's favor. Refusal to pay the extorter results in harm to the vendor. So, gumagamit ng threat para makuha yung gusto or kapalit. Katulad ng example dito, yung contractor agent is binlockmail niya yung isang contractor na tatanggalin sa trabaho kapag hindi nagbigay sa kanya ng cash. So, kapag hindi siya nagbigay, automatic mawawalan siya ng trabaho. Next is conflicts of interest. occurs when an employee acts on behalf of third party during the discharge of his or her duties or has self-interest in the activity being performed. So dito, nag-occur siya kapag yung entity or individual is naging unreliable because of a clash between his personal interest and professional duties niya sa company. So, sa business, nag-a-arise ang isang conflict of interest kapag yung employee mas pinili niya yung personal gain niya, yung personal interest niya over sa duties niya sa employer. So, pwede rin sa organization. Example, isang stakeholder. So, it arises kapag ginagamit mo yung position mo unfairly for your personal gain. So, each people na nagko-commit sa isang company or business, they have these fiduciary duties and duties of loyalty. So, next sa corruption, fraud, nangyayari din sa isang business ang asset misappropriation fraud. So, it happens when people who are entrusted to manage assets of an organization steal from it. Asset misappropriation fraud involves third parties or employees and organization who abuse their position to steal from it through fraudulent activity. So, it can also be known as insider fraud. So, ibig sabihin, unlawful or unauthorized na paggamit ng assets ng company. So, it can be committed by company directors or yung mga employees or kahit sino na entrusted na humahawak nung or nagmamanage ng assets and interest ng organization. So, it fall into 8 categories. Makikita nyo dito sa table 12.9, different types ng asset misappropriation schemes. We have scheming, cash larceny, billing, check tampering, payroll, expense reimbursement, theft of cash, and non-cash misappropriation. So, first, dito tayo sa scheming. It involves stealing cash from an organization before it's recorded in the organization's books and records. So, isa siyang example ng white-collar crime, meaning walang ginawang anything physical force or threat. So, it is a non-violent crime na ginagawa for financial gain. So, it involves taking the cash of a business prior to entering it into the accounting system. So, cash theft has occurred bago malagay sa bookkeeping system ng company. So, it is never reported sa accounting records. Next is cash larceny. It involves schemes where cash receipts are stolen from organization after they have been recorded in the organization books and records. So, ito naman, kabaliktaran siya ng scheming. Ninanakaw nila yung cash or assets na nakarecord na sa books of accounts. So, this fraud is done by an employee without the consent or knowledge of the employer. So, it can happen by first, stealing from cash register. So, second, dinay-reverse nila yung cash transactions. Third, in-alter nila yung cash kapag in-charge sila sa pag-record ng cash payments. Tinitake nila yung opportunity para maiba yung cash count. Fourth is they are writing personal checks to cover theft. So, kino-cover nila yung cash balance with a personal check as a way of reconciling the cash difference. Next sa cash larceny is billing schemes, also known as vendor fraud, are perpetrated by employees who cause their employer to issue a payment to a false supplier or vendor by submitting invoices for fictitious goods or services, inflated invoices, or invoices for personal purchases. Dito sa sa billing schemes, nag-i-issue or nagsasubmit yung isang employee ng peking invoice or receipt sa company causes the victim company to issue fraudulent payments. So, these are classified sa 3 categories. First is the shell company. Schemes uses a fake entity established by a dishonest employee to bill a company for goods or services it does not receive. The employee converts the payment to his or her own benefit. Second is pass-through schemes, uses a shell company established by an employee to purchase goods or services for the employer, which are then marked up and sold to the employer through the shell. The employee converts the markup to his or her own benefit also. Pay and return schemes involves an employee purposely causing an overpayment to a legitimate vendor. When the vendor returns the overpayment to the company, the employee embezzles the refund. Next is check tampering, involves forging or changing in some material way a check that the organization has written to a legitimate payee. So, ito yung pinakamadalas na nangyari sa isang small business. An employee steals company funds by forging or altering a check drawn on one of the organization's bank accounts. So, it can fraudulently na pag-prepare niya ng check drawn on the organization's account for his own benefit, or intercepting a check drawn on the organization's account that is intended for a third party and converting the check for his own benefit. So there are five methods na ginagamit to commit check tampering. Una is forged marker scheme. So dito may access si employee sa blank check. Tapos pipirmahan niya yon, gagayahin niya yung pirma ng authorized na pipirma sa check. So ayun. So next is forged endorsements. So dito naman is fraudulent payment siya. Yung check na dapat ibabayad sa third party is i-intercept ng employee. So, i-convert niya yun by endorsing the check to the third party's name. Pwede ding altered payees. Dito naman, pinapalitan mismo ng employee yung pangalan ng receiver on her behalf. So, pwede rin concealed check schemes. Dito naman, nakahalo yung mga fraudulent check sa iba pang mga checks. So, para pag pinirmahan ng authorized na pipirma is hindi mahahalata. And last is authorized maker schemes. So, dito naman may hawak siyang blank check na napirmahan na ng authorized na pipirma ng check. Then, ilalagay niya na lang yung name niya dun sa receiver. Next, sa check tampering, payroll fraud. It is the distribution of fraudulent paychecks to existent and or non-existent employee. So, dito, pag nanakaw ng cash or assets by the use of payroll system ng company. Dito naman, when employees or mismong employers wrongfully manipulate the payroll system para ma-receive nila yung payment na di pa naman nila na-earn as an employee. Sa case naman as an employer, withhold nila yung payment of rightfully earned wages or taxes due on those wages. So, there are 3 types ng payroll fraud. First is timesheet fraud. It involves paying employees incorrectly for the hours they work. Next is ghost employees. Ito naman, it's either a fake employee na hindi pa nagtatrabaho sa company but meron siyang created payroll to divert funds, or pwede rin someone na nagtrabaho na sa company mo pero nung umalis na siya, hindi siya natanggal dun sa listahan ng payroll system nyo. Last is employee misclassification. And then employee misclassification. Next is expense reimbursement fraud. Are schemes which an employee makes a claim for reimbursement of gratuitous or inflated business expenses. So dito is method for paying employees back when they spend their own money on imaginary or inflated business-related expense. So, hindi talaga nangyari na nagkaroon ng business-related expense. So, imaginary lang yon. So, yun. Nagkaroon sila ng money na dapat, yung money na yon is dapat for expense na ginamit nila na business-related. Pero, since imaginary lang yon, yung money na binayad sa kanila is for their own benefit. Next is, thefts of cash are schemes that involve the direct theft of cash on hand in organization. So, ito yung mismong pagkuha mo, pagnakaw mo ng cash sa company nyo. Ayun. Ito, non-cash misappropriation. So, kanina, assets misappropriations. Dito naman, non-cash. So, schemes make the theft or misuse of victims' organizations non-cash assets. So, ito, physical assets including inventory and equipment were the most commonly misappropriated non-cash assets. Misappropriation of these types of assets is simple to do sa mga employees in the normal course of their duties kasi may access sila to these items. So, there are various forms of non-cash misappropriation that includes misuse, abuse, unconcealed misappropriations, transfer of asset, and proprietary information. Sa misuse and abuse, it is the misuse of organization assets does not usually involve theft, but rather the use of the asset without proper organization. Next is unconcealed misappropriation. This type of theft of assets is the easiest to perform. Just take the goods and walk away. There is no attempt to adjust the books and records to conceal the action. Most people would assume that their coworker is removing the asset of merchandise as part ng trabaho nila. But they are perpetrated it by the long time. Next is transfer of assets. The employee requests material to be used in a project. The project may be a fabrication where the employee can keep all the requested material. Last is the proprietary information. Intangible assets such as information are subject to misappropriations also. This type of asset is difficult to protect because restricting access prevents employees from doing their jobs. Next topic is the computer fraud. So, closely like the internet fraud is defined as the use of computer or computer system to help execute a scheme or illegal activity and the targeting of a computer with the intent to after damage or disable it. So, examples of computer fraud is distributing hoax or fabricated emails. Second, accessing unauthorized computers. Third, engaging in a data mining via spyware and malware. Fourth is hacking into computer system to illegally access personal information. Fifth is sending computer viruses or worms with the intent to destroy or ruin another party's computer or system.